We've already looked at numerical and algebraic models. Now we're going to look at graphical models. Graphical models are visual representations of numerical models and the algebraic models, and it gives us insight to the relationships between those variables. What it does is it puts the data points into more of a picture or a graph for us, and it's much easier to visualize what's happening then. The data we have here is some data from Galileo's gravity experiments. He spent years rolling balls down the inclined planes and measuring how far they travel each second. So the data is something that you've probably generated before if you've been in like a physics class. Our job is to use our calculator now to create a scatter plot on the calculator of this data, and then we're going to use our calculator instead of one point to create the quadratic equation. So there are several steps that you have to go through on your calculator to get the data to show up. First thing we have to do is enter the data into our calculator. So when you turn the calculator on, you're going to go to Stat. And we want to enter it, so we're going to hit Edit. And my calculator has some data already in it, so I'm going to clear out the data. To clear it, I move my cursor to the top, hit the button Clear, and then move my cursor down. In column 1, move the cursor to the top, hit Clear, and move it down. Now we can enter the data easily. My data is 0 to 8, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Then I move over and my data for column 2 is 0, 0.75, 3, 6.75, 12, 18.75, 27, 37.75, and 48. Okay, so that's what my data looks like. Now, if I hit graph, what I find is nothing happens. And nothing happens because I haven't told my calculator that there is statistical data in there. So what I need to do is tell my calculator that. I have to get my calculator ready to accept that data. I do that by turning on what's called a stat plot. So we're going to go second y equals. Second y equals allows me to turn on my graph for statistical data. I'm going to turn on number 1, so I hit enter. I want it on, so I'm going to hit enter. This is the graph I want. This is a scatter plot. Over here we've got a histogram. Here's some box and whisker graphs. Okay, we're dealing with the scatter plot. So that's the one we want. When I come down here to X list, it's saying, what do you want your X variable to be? Well, that's going to be list 1. And then, what do you want your Y variable to be? Our Y variable was list 2. These are our X's, these are our Y's. The last thing I have to choose is what kind of symbol I want on my graph. If, for example, we were going to compare several things, maybe we would take the number of, given a certain year, how many pounds of broccoli males eat and females eat. Well, we would have to plot the year, and then we do males versus females. So we might mark the males with this, and then turn on a second plot, and then use the plus sign. So right now, typically your calculator will default to the first one. Okay, so we can exit out of here by doing second mode or quit. Now if we hit graph, we should get somewhat of a representation of our data. What I really want to do is zoom in and get all of my data. So if we do a zoom 9, zoom 9 is a zoom stat. What that will do is it will put all of your data points into the window. So given that, we now can look at the graph of this data. Hopefully you recognize that this represents 1/2 of a parabola. So we want to find now the equation for this parabola. To find the equation for this, we're going back to stat. We're going to calculate. So as we calculate an equation for a parabola, we want to use number 5, quadratic regression. With the quadratic regression, okay, it pauses here as you hit enter. What that allows us to do is choose which lists we are comparing. So for example, we're doing list 1, list 2, okay, but maybe sometime you want to compare list 1 to list 3. there's a pause here that allows you to put those constraints in. We don't have any constraints, so you can simply hit enter, and then my quadratic equation is generated here. It gives me first the equation ax squared plus bx plus c, then it tells me it's 0.757575 repeating. My b value is a negative 0.0106, my c value is a 0.018, and I can plug all those values into my equation. Okay, so the equation we have is going to be 0.75 x squared plus my b value is a negative 0.01 x, and my c value is a negative 0.01. So simplifying that, we'll call it a 0.75 x squared minus 0.01 x minus 0.01. That would be the equation for this data. So let's make a list of the steps that we used to accomplish this task. Okay, the first thing we had to do was enter our data points. So to enter the data points, what we did was we went to Stat, we hit Edit, and then in order to clear, remember that we up arrow, hit clear, and then we down arrow. Finally then, we can enter the data. Okay, then we had to turn on the stat plots. Okay, so to turn on the stat plot, we did second y equals, we hit enter to turn on the first one, we turned it on, and we want to double check that our x was L1 and that our y was L2. Finally, we wanted to graph. You can hit the graph button, but then remember that you want to do a zoom 9. Okay, to find the actual equation, we went to Stat again, but this time we went over to Calculate. We chose quadratic regression. In the next example, we'll choose a linear regression. We hit enter. The first enter is where the pause is, okay, and then we hit enter again. And at that point, we copied down our equation. So those are the steps that it takes to accomplish getting data points graphed and then eventually finding an equation for them. Okay, so as we move to this next example, looking at example 5, fitting a curve to data. T is the number of years after 1980, and F is the percentage of females in prison. So we're back to our prison example. And what we're going to do is we're going to use our calculator this time. We're not going to use 2 points. We're going to do a linear equation on the calculator. So let's cross this out. Okay, we'll use regression. So we're going to go through all of those steps that we just wrote down on the previous page. Okay, so let's put our data into the calculator. We do Stat, Edit, and we clear our lists. Okay, we enter our data. We have 0, 5, 10, 15, and 20. When we move to the second column, we have 3.8, 4.4, 5.5, 5.9, and 6.7. Okay, so we've entered the data into our calculator. We already have our stat plot on, so we don't need to go through putting our stat plot on. We can simply hit graph now, but we need to do the zoom fit. There's only 1 point coming up here. So zoom 9, you can scroll up to 9 because it's faster than scrolling down. Here are all of our data points. So given our data points now, we need to come up with the equation. This time we want a linear equation. So if we want a linear equation, we need to do that regression. So it's Stat, Calculate, Linear regression is number 4 on my calculator, so I hit enter. Remember that it pauses. I hit enter again, and I find that I get the equation y equals ax plus b. A is 0.146 x plus b is 3.8. So this is my linear equation for that data.